So anyway, this session is on accompanying. How many of us accompany? You guys like accompanying? How many of us accompany? What kind of ensembles do we accompany? Are we at churches primarily, I would guess, or are there any colleges or anything like that you accompany to college? Okay, and the rest are church. What kind of choirs do you accompany? Any in particular? SATB, normal choir, or men's? What is this?
I do the men's choir at Texas A&M.
Okay, men's choir at Texas A&M. All right. Public school. Okay. Cool. Very cool. Very cool. Well, we're going to talk. This will probably be a quick session. I bet I'll probably be done maybe in 40 minutes, and then we can ask questions if you have any. We're going to talk about, again, I told the group in my last session I was going to tell them some common sense kind of things. And there's a lot of that this time too, actually. And I don't want to give you old news or waste your time, but I found out in so much of music teaching that a lot of times it's the common sense thing that isn't always taught, because you just assume people know. And you pass it over, and sometimes those are the areas that, kind of need to be touched on. So that's what we're going to do today, is kind of talk about accompanying 101, some basic accompanying skills. I kind of thought maybe I would make this session about solo accompanying, but then I thought, that's kind of an interesting topic, but it might not necessarily be the best for us, because I'm sure we all accompany singers at one time or another, but most of our time is spent accompanying choral ensembles, so that's where I decided to stay. We have accompanists in here. Do we have any directors? No? Okay. The relationship between the director and the accompanist. That's the first thing that I want to talk about. I've got that listed underneath, in my notes under introduction. I don't think you have it in there. But the first thing we want to hit on is the relationship between the director and the accompanist. This can be, I hope that you have a good relationship with your director as the accompanist. I have had great relationships with directors. I've had really bad relationships with directors. I was accompanying a college choir one time. I won't mention where it was or who the director was, but anyway, I didn't pull up his open score parts fast enough, and he was not pleased with my performance. And I was a grad student, he'd already been through 3 or 4 pianists and sent them away, and now he had called me in, and I was the bottom of the line, and I was the final one left, and so I was going to have to use me because there just wasn't anyone else. And I was scared to death in there, and in front of 60 kids. And I hit a wrong note, or I didn't pull up a part fast enough or something. And he says, "Brad, you see that spot on the floor? There was a carpet stain that had been getting wet and dry." I said, "Yeah, I see it. That's what we did to our last accompanist." That could be a funny remark, but he didn't say it funny. He said it kind of mean. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to be like warped, or not warped, but like Star Trek. They're going to shoot me and face me. I'm going to turn into a stink of water. But I've had great experiences with directors and not so great. There's a wonderful book on accompanying. I throw out a lot of books when I speak to people, because nowadays there's so many great resources out there. This is the book, Choral Questions and Answers. It's by Jan Sandborn and Alan Petker. Alan Petker is with Pavan Publishing, if you know Pavan. They I guess primarily do more school materials, but they have put together a little resource. It's 16 pages. You can read it in 10 minutes. And it's Choral Questions and Answers. They have a couple of volumes. This is volume 5, Accompanying, for the accompanist and the director. So some of the ideas that I talk about today are going to come from this book, and some will come from some other places. But Petker writes this, and I'm going to read this quote: "The relationship between a director and an accompanist might be comparable to a 2-person boat crew. One is the skipper and one is the mate, yet both are needed to run the ship. In fact, a good mate not only makes the boat run well, the mate also makes the skipper look good." If you've got a good choir director, that might not be hard to do. If you accompany for Satan, it might be hard sometimes to make him look good. Hopefully that's not the case with any of you guys. Petker goes on to say that a good accompanist can not only make the director look good, but can actually save the day. How many times has your quick thinking saved the choral day? Right? And you've got eyes rolling back there. You know it. On the other hand, an accompanist that does not understand the nature of their relationship with the director, can hold back a rehearsal and in fact can hold back the entire choir. So there's a lot that we can say about the relationship between a director and an accompanist. But today, obviously, we focus on the accompanying end of things and your relationship with the director. And so the one thing that I want to start us off with is that when you're working for a director, he or she is the boss. It's their choir. You're not the boss. And they are. And everything has to operate with that principle. If this is something where, you can't work with this person, then, you've got really two options. I think Pecker says this in his book. You can try to outlast that person or you can move on, right? But when you're in the rehearsal, you're not the boss. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in just a second. Professional and personal qualities of a great accompanist. Not everyone can be a good accompanist. Do you guys realize that? Not every great solo pianist makes a great accompanist. Why? They've certainly got the technique for it. Any ideas? Why would a solo pianist not always make a great accompanist?
You have to be able to work with people.
Mm-hmm. Sure. You've got to be able to work with people. You've got to, again, realize that you're not the boss. And if you're a solo pianist and you're used to, doing it your way, and this is my musical vision and my interpretation, and I'm used to doing it my way, and now then I'm going to superimpose my interpretation onto you, the director in this choir, then, there can be some real trouble, right, brewing. And so that's one reason why solo pianists do not always make the best accompanists. We're going to give you a few more. I'm going to list and briefly talk through some of these traits and kind of give you some experiences that I've had. And then before it's over, I'm going to go to the piano and show you some practical things that can maybe improve your accompanying, so it won't all just be me blabbering on. Dedicated, dependable, and punctual. When you accompany a choir, you need to be absolutely 100% dedicated to it. You really do. This is where I said, and I was kind of joking a little bit when I said that sometimes accompanists are disgruntled solo players. That might not be true. But I remember when I was going through school that all of us, in my college, we all thought we were going to be the next concert pianist, and of course, no one turned into the next concert pianist because there's 10 of those people in the whole world. But that was our dream, and we would be stuck accompanying these choirs, and no one wanted to. It was just kind of what we had to do to get our little graduate assistant paycheck. Well, you have to be 100% dedicated to a choir when you're there. And that means all the obvious things: punctuality, being dependable, someone that can be relied on, practicing your music. Gosh, when I was accompanying, I would work hard on my Chopin Etude, but not really do so much with the choral music. So maybe the director needed to turn me into a water stain on the floor. But that's enough for that. I'm not going to spend time on this point because dedicated, dependable, and punctual are very, very obvious points. Good sense of humor. I have found, it depends on the director, but I have found that having a good sense of humor really can help enliven a choir practice. I work with a guy right now. His name is Mark Clark. He's from Wichita. He and I write music together. We've got a couple of things. I don't know if any of them will be presented at this conference, but he's a great little tune writer. He doesn't arrange, but he can write great tunes, and so we work together professionally in that way. But he and I have a very fun relationship. He's a bit older than me. I'm 38. He's 59. But we kind of play back and forth with each other. We joust, with each other, and we have a good time doing that. It's very respectful. He never says anything to me that would undermine who I am or what I do, and I certainly never say anything to him that would undermine his authority in front of the group. But we have a lot of fun, and it's very friendly, and the kids love it, and I've had that relationship with directors in a school setting and also in a church setting. And if you can have a good sense of humor and kind of be, fun and lively when it's appropriate, then that can kind of add to rehearsal, making it not quite as tedious. Selfless. You need to be a good accompanist, and this is another reason why not all solo pianists make fine accompanists. You need to put the choir first, I found, in everything. I have even went so far as to save the day in performances, and I'm not patting myself on the back for this, I just think it's what good accompanists do. It's what I would expect you guys to do. I have went so far as to save the day in performances and yet assume responsibility for the mistake when it wasn't really mine. You know, but if something went wrong and the audience could tell it, and then they come up to me and say, "Oh, Brad, you did a good job saving the choir. We heard that. It almost fell apart." There have been times where I could have said, "Oh, yeah, I mean, look, I'm having to save the day all the time." No, I've said, "Well, you know what? I think I might have messed up there." So the singers did a good job and held it together. It's that kind of selflessness that you really do need to be a good accompanist. You need to be selfless in order to put the director first and let him be the boss. I talked about that a little bit earlier. Mark, this gentleman that I work with, he has only been at our school a couple of years. I've been there longer than him, and I'm the department chair. I'm his boss. But when we get into the rehearsal room, he's the boss. And I submit to that. And that's selfless. Patient. You guys ever have to be patient in a choir rehearsal? Even with the college choirs that I work with, I can feel the need for patience. But certainly, when you're working with a church choir, and you've got 8, 9, 10, 15, 20 people there that might not read, a tenor section that struggles with rhythm, and frankly, a director that might not be as educated in music as you are. A lot of people are fortunate to have very fine directors. If you're one of those, that's terrific. A lot of times, the pianist, the accompanist, will be the most educated person in the room. Because even a director hasn't been through the theory that you've probably been through in piano lessons and things like that. Well, it takes a lot of patience. When you're in a rehearsal getting ready for your Christmas cantata, and the men have just made the same mistake that they have made the last 20 rehearsals in the same spot at the same time, and the director's having to reteach it, it's so easy to, maybe look at the watch or just give off any kind of sign of frustration. You just can't do that. Again, that ties in with putting the choir first. Don't show frustration with them. They can pick up on that. And you're kind of although you're not the leader, you are kind of a co-leader. And you want to not ever show any frustration with those folks. All those are personal things that hopefully you have, and if you don't have, you need to develop, right? To kind of have the mindset of working with a choir. And you can see probably very clearly now why not all solo pianists make great accompanists. Some do. A lot of them do. But that's not necessarily the case. Because a lot of these selfless and patient and kind and a lot of those kind of things aren't necessarily in the menu when you're trying to win the Van Cliburn. So what about musical qualities of a great accompanist? I'm going to talk through some of the musical qualities, and then I'm going to talk about all the different ways we can improve our accompanying, and that'll be kind of how we play out the rest of the day. By the way, stop me if you have any questions. I get tired of hearing myself speak. I know a gazillion awful jokes that I can tell you. Things get kind of boring, but stop me if you have any questions. But familiarity with a variety of styles. Why is that important? Kind of an obvious thing. As an accompanist, particularly in today's church, you're going to be called upon to play all sorts of different styles, right? You'll play, a Stan Ethel Southern Gospel anthem, and then something that Joe might write that's a little more traditional than something Heather might write, which is a little more contemporary, Heather's voice. So you've got to be familiar with all of these different styles because it informs how you play those styles. I grew up in the Deep South, as I've told you, and I mean, it doesn't matter what it is, everything that you do down there goes back to a boom-chuck pattern. That's what it is. I just grew up doing boom-chuck. Well, if you listen to all these, Southern Gospel quartets and things like that, but then you get something more contemporary in front of you, you're going to play it, as you would if you were a Southern Gospel pianist. So you've got to be familiar with a lot of different styles. Good sense of rhythm. This is something I'm going to talk about here in just a second, a lot, and maybe give you guys some things to do to improve your rhythm. Not all music that you play has to be metronomic. right? You know, a lot of times we'll play something that has some rubato that moves forward and pulls back, but a lot of contemporary Christian, a lot of, you know, Southern gospel, a lot of black gospel, a lot of Christian rock, a lot of these styles are music that's kind of rhythm section music. What I mean is, you know, if you listen to authentic people playing in these styles, they've got a rhythm section, right? And when you're accompanying, unless, you know, you have an orchestra with you, you are the rhythm section. And so a good sense of time in order to keep that tempo steady is imperative. And that's something that I actually find probably the most lacking in my piano students that I work with, and what I hear lacking kind of the most maybe in places that I go and people that I hear accompany. So hang on just for a few minutes and we'll talk about ways to kind of improve your rhythm. Knowledge of the vocal instrument. Not knowing how to sing. I am the worst singer in the world. But you know, I'm not a bad choir director, actually. Although God chose not to give me a great voice, but I do understand how to use the voice, and I understand how to get you to use your voice. And part of that comes from years of accompanying. I've just been with good directors, and I've heard problems, and rather than just sit there and, you know, count the ceiling tiles on the ceiling, you know, I've tried to hone in, and if there's a problem, let's hear how he or she fixes it. You know, and if the solutions they try really work, or if they don't work, you know. I've taken some voice lessons, you know, before, not because I want to be a singer, but just because I want to know a little bit more about the people, singers, that I work with all the time. And so you probably pretty obviously can understand, you know, the benefits, right, to you know, knowing something about the voice. Your director will love you when it's time to go do sectionals. Right, because you can not only, you know, pound out the right notes, but you can address breathing and tone and vowels and consonants. So good musical qualities of an accompanist, if you can kind of, you know something a little bit about the voice, that's probably a good thing. D&E, we're going to skip right through. Good sight reading ability, that goes without saying. I mean, you know, any of us probably have developed the idea or the ability to sight read at least at a fairly decent level. Ability to read both closed and open scores. Do we know what an open score is and what a closed score is?
Well, I definitely know what an open score is. That is my nemesis.
Yeah, right, okay.
I mean, I do everything well because I'm doing it for forever.
Yeah.
But an open score just throws me out of the ballpark.
Cool. We'll talk about maybe some things to do.
Closed score?
Closed score is just what you see in most church octavos.
Okay.
Yeah, that's closed score. And most of what we in the church deal with, most of our octavos are written closed score. You know, where you've got the piano, grand staff, and then you have soprano and alto on one staff and tenor and bass on the other. When you get into collegiate accompanying, and even high school accompanying, then you start to see open score a little bit more. Usually most people probably only have to deal with open score if you're a church pianist every Christmas when it's time to pull out the Alleluia chorus, you know, or something like that from, you know, that's when we kind of have to brush up on that. But most people don't have to encounter that. But it's a good idea to kind of know, you know, how to handle that. Again, I'm moving on from it right now, but I'm not leaving you on that. All these things I'm telling you about, I will come back and kind of give you some ways to improve each one of these. I'm just zipping through what I think are good musical traits right now. Then we'll come back and talk about how to improve our craft. Do you know what I mean when I say functional keyboard skills? If you are around a college any amount of time, you're going to hear that word. Functional keyboard skills are all the types of skills that you learn in class piano. You know, if you were a music major, you guys, some of you, or maybe all of you, were majors. But since you were pianists, you probably didn't have to go through class piano. But if you are a music major and you're not a pianist, then everyone goes through class piano because we feel like the piano is the best instrument out there and everyone needs to know a little something about it. Well, what we teach our music majors, our non-pianist music majors in class piano, is functional keyboard skills. This is where we get into the transposition and the harmonization. You know, the ability to improvise and the ability to you know, do good musical things above and beyond just being able to play repertoire, right? All of these things, improvisation and transposition, the ability to harmonize and read from a lead sheet. By the way, I'm doing a lead sheet session, so I'd love for you guys to come to that. All those things are good musical traits, right, that an accompanist, you know, can kind of work to develop. Now, finally, I think the last thing that I have here on this first, or on part 3, is good mind reading ability. Yeah, this is probably the thing that directors look for the most. You know, when they stop a choir, they kind of want you to be ready to cue up those parts before they even say where you're going to go. And I think that's one of the reasons Mark and I have such a good relationship, because I really can read his mind. And it takes a while, you know, to get to that familiarity level. But you need to be working for that. You know, you need to be able to become a little bit of a mind reader. Again, we'll talk about some ways to do that here in just a minute. Okay. So, let's look at the next section. Some ways to master your craft, both in and out of rehearsal. Do you guys have directors that just makes you sight read everything? Or is he or she pretty good about getting music to you? Yeah, yeah. I tell you what, if you could, you know, have a friendly talk with that person and say, you know, give me the music, or in Jesus' name I'm going to slap you. Well, maybe not do that. But if you could have a friendly talk with your director and have them get you the music, then there's some preparatory things that you could do with the music that could make accompanying more fun for you. Okay? But the music is easy, you might say. I mean, I'm sure you can sight read it at the first rehearsal. But if you have prep time with the music, you can just delve into the music a little bit deeper and find some things to think about that can make you a better mind reader, that can make you a better help to the singers, that can make you a better accompanist. What kind of things? I know this is going to seem like overkill to you guys, but my accompanying students, I ask them to do this. When they get a piece of music, no matter how hard or how easy it is, the first thing I want them to do is to take it and examine the form. What do I mean when I say the form of the piece? This gets a little bit more into a compositional kind of thing, but you know, every piece has a form. Okay? Any takers? Anyone want to throw out a guess on what I mean by form? You got it. That's it. That's it. That's all I mean by it. Every piece has a form. Most choir anthems, you know, the next time you guys go out into a reading session, you pay attention to this when we have a reading session later. A lot of choir anthems are in ABA form. You have a melody that happens, and then maybe they go off into another key for the B section, and then that section, the A section, comes back really big at the end, maybe in a new key. That's kind of the typical form, you know, for choir anthems. AABA, okay, is a typical form. Again, this is maybe a little more compositionally than I want to go into, but if you were a Broadway tune writer in the 30s and 40s, your bread and butter would be AABA. Okay? It's a 32-bar form. You know, Duke Ellington? You guys don't take the H right? It's an old jazz tune. I'm just trying to kind of think of an ABA form off the top of my head. Here's the first A section. It's 8 measures long. Right, then it repeats. Here it goes. This is the second A. Right. Now we're going to the B section, which is something different. There it goes. Now we're back to the A. Right, then you're done. Right, that's a typical AABA thing, and a lot of choir pieces work that way. Verse, chorus, you know, if you turn on the radio, how many times do we hear the verse, the chorus, the verse, the chorus, maybe a bridge, and then the final chorus? You know, it's a form. Well, your familiarity with those forms improves your accompanying, right? Talk about some ways here in just a second how it does that. When you practice, I have my students do this. I have them practice the parts in every combination you can think of. Okay? This particularly will help with open score. Okay? If it's SATB, I want them to practice SA. I want them to practice AT. I want them to practice ST. I want them to practice AB. I practice every single combination that you can possibly practice. okay, when you're working through this. Now, here's where it gets to be a little bit overkill, but I would challenge you to do this sometimes. As an accompanist, have you ever sat at the piano and sang through every part yourself? Cool. If you have, that's awesome.
Well, not every part.
Yeah, right. But it would be cool sometimes to sit and sing through every part. Now, depending on how tyrannical your director is, and hopefully you don't have a very tyrannical director, but depending on if you do, this is going to help you out a lot, because you know what? If it's hard for you to sing, it's probably hard for the choir to sing. And so as you take the time yourself to sing through every part, you're going to find out right away where people are going to need help. And then, if you want to save rehearsal time when you're doing that first read-through, or when you're, accompanying, for the 100th time, if you get to a spot where you know this is a hard tenor line here, bring that part out, right? And the tenors will hear it. And then you've saved the director having to stop and go and fix it, him or herself.
Therein comes mind reading again.
Therein comes mind reading again, absolutely. And that's overkill, it seems like it, to sit and sing every single part. What about this? Here's another thing. When you take the time to really sing every part, I'm going to talk a little bit about this in another session called Becoming Musical Extroverts. But one of the things that we don't have to worry about as pianists, breathing. Right? I can play and play and play and play and play, and I never have to take a breath. Not so with singers, right? So if you look for the breath places in your score, or if it's not marked, the places where you want to take a breath, where you need to take a breath, chances are the choir will too. And so as you play the accompaniment, you keep that in mind, right? If the choir has a really long 4-measure phrase that they have to hold one note out and the tempo is adagio, then maybe that's the point where you have to speed up a little bit to help them, right? Does that make sense? There's little insights that you can learn. When you're working with your accompaniment, I always like to sit and, with the voice parts in mind, I look at my accompaniment and I think, okay, are there any tricky, this is also in the Petker book, by the way, are there any tricky parts, entrances that the voices might have where they get their cue from something that's happening in the piano accompaniment? Okay? Well, I like to know where those parts are. That way, when I'm accompanying, I don't just rattle through it, but I can highlight that. I can highlight that note to facilitate the choir's entrance, right? Why not lay all that stuff out from the beginning, right? And the choir and maybe even the director won't even know how you're helping everyone be more efficient, just because you've taken some time to do a little bit of prep work on your own, and it helps save rehearsal time. Does that make sense? I mean, it's common sense stuff, but I think it really is pretty valuable. B, have your music, this is obvious, have your music organized in a binder. I mean, I'm not going to talk on these things because it's just wasting your time. You guys know that. If he pulls up or she pulls up a chart or an octavo, you don't want to be the last one finding your music. Have it ready. I mean, you guys know that. One of the things that if you have a director who is open to this, if you look at C, I like to discuss musical interpretive issues with the director ahead of time. Now, if your director, he might be sight reading, or she might be sight reading the piece just like you are. And if you guys both say, well, we're going to kind of lay out what we're going to do here with this piece ahead of time, that might cause your director to kind of think a little bit more musically about things than maybe they have been. But then you're on the same page right from the very beginning. Okay? So that, in order for that to happen, you have to have the music a little bit earlier, and the director has to be willing to sit and talk. And that doesn't mean that the director's interpretation of the music can't change, as you work through it, but at least you have kind of a groundwork there to work from. I like to have every measure number. Some publishing companies do that. Beckenhorst does that. They number every measure. We read that Fred Bach anthem with Mary, her arrangement from Fred Bach, and they had every measure numbered, but a lot don't. I primarily write for Shawnee, and they'll put big measures in important spots, measure numbers, but at the first of the line, I like to take the time to number every measure, because when the director calls out a measure, I want to be the first one there. And all these little things, it's little subtle things, but choirs pick up on that, and directors pick up on that. There'll be an accompanist that they'll really appreciate and love, so I do all that. How many of your choirs do warm-ups? Good. Yeah, I'm glad. it seems like more and more, a lot of choral ensembles are doing warm-ups. If you've got a director that's really well-trained, chances are, they're coming from a collegiate background, and they're going to want to do some kind of warm-up. Take the time, this might be something that has to happen outside of rehearsal, but take the time to really master all of the warm-up. Do you guys know that the warm-up session is probably the most important part of a choir rehearsal? Because that's really the moment where everyone's getting focused and coming together and they're working on their tone. Not that they won't work on other important things like that throughout the rehearsal, but this is one spot right at the beginning where the director's honing everyone in. And you can be a real hindrance to that if you're not careful. Our director, Mark, he has about, every time you go to a new director, you have to learn all their tricks. Everyone has different warm-up patterns. And I've learned all of Mark's now. And I always try to play them with a good rhythm, right? Most warm-ups have a good rhythm. It might be something, he does A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. He'll do that kind of a thing. And, rather than just sit there and kind of stuff through it, I'll, put a little, once I get them going, once I get them playing it, then I might put a pattern underneath or something just to keep them in rhythm. If it's an exercise that changes keys, you guys know you always facilitate the new key, with maybe some kind of a dominant, preparation, right? So I'm in C and I'm going to work up chromatically, then I go into that key, and then I'm going to work up, chromatically, that kind of a thing. Do you guys understand what I'm talking about when these are things that a lot of us probably already do. But those kind of things help keep a good solid rhythm, and using the dominant as you get into a new key helps establish tonality with the singers, and so they appreciate that. Okay, staying attuned to the director, that's kind of a mind-reading thing a little bit again. I have a lot of really fun students that I work with at the school, and I really am kind of a jokester, and I have a lot of fun with these kids, probably more fun than I should have. So they're always joking with me and having fun, and when I come into a rehearsal, it's sometimes hard to kind of tune all that out because they're trying to get my attention or being goofy or whatever, and it really is time to focus on just the director when you get in there. We've already talked about, we hadn't get to G yet, we're at F. Pounding parts. I want to park here for a minute and give you some little piano exercises on this. I hate that term, pounding parts, because pounding in parts implies pounding parts. Okay, choir, we're going to learn Amazing Grace. Can you hear it? Isn't that, gosh, awful? It's just awful. I hate pounding parts. When I play parts for the choir, you have to play with a good firm tone because they have to hear it. But I want to play as beautifully as I can possibly play. Okay? Because they're taking their cue from me, although I'm not singing it. They're taking their cue from me, and if I play the parts with an ugly tone, I guarantee they're going to sing with a tone that's less than beautiful. I want to play as musically as I can, so I play parts just like it's a solo piece. I play it like it's the most pretty part. It's the whole piece, and I'm going to make it just as beautiful as I can. I play with dynamics. Okay, that's something that's so easy for us, in the midst of rehearsal, we're just playing the parts. We ignore the dynamics. But yet the director wants the choir to sing with dynamics. If you're playing a part for someone that's supposed to be pianissimo, why are you playing it forte? With an ugly, harsh tone. Right? Now you have to play it enough to let them hear it. But I want to model on the piano the sound that we want to eventually get from the choir. So that's an immediate fix for, I think, a lot of what I've heard in rehearsals is just don't play parts very ugly. Have you guys ever had to play an SATB texture? I wish I could have it here. I don't. Have you guys ever had to, I was thinking about going out and getting one, but I won't. Have you guys ever had to play an SATB texture and you feel like that, okay, the soprano and the alto and the bass are okay, but my tenors, they're not quite getting it. I sure do. I'd like to play all four parts, but I wish I could just bring out the tenor line a little bit and make that speak. Isn't that hard to do? I think it's hard.
I have trained myself to do it pretty well.
How do you do it?
I concentrate really hard.
Okay.
And I sing mentally that part
awesome, and that helps you bring it out.
Absolutely.
Let me tell you a little voicing trick that has helped me. And by the way, this can help with your solo piano playing. Because, we want to voice out anything we play. We want, to show where the melody is if it's solo. And if it's SATB, then we want to show where the part is. One of the things that one of my old teachers, a guy named Jeff Hayden, told me, and he was a UT Austin guy. I think he studied with maybe Greg or Nancy Garrett, maybe Daniel Martin, or one of those guys, if you're familiar with the Austin faculty. So this might have come from them. But if you want to voice a note, and I'm going to demonstrate this just with a little 4-note chord. I'm playing middle C, and then an E, and then a G, and then a C. Okay? If I want to bring out that top C, right, you can hear that, right? It's being brought out. I'm a little low on my third right there. That's better. If you want to voice that, one of the ways you can practice that is by playing the entire chord at one time and letting go of every note immediately, staccato, except for the note that you want to hold. So what you get is this. Right? It's a great way of practicing. Okay, so I don't have a hymn book here in front of me, but if you were working through, Amazing Grace or What a Friend We Have in Jesus or whatever it might be, let's see, this is probably the hymn book harmonization for What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and you wanted to just practice bringing out the tenor. I don't know where it goes from there. I'm just kind of guessing, but I'm letting everything go except for just the tenor line. And if you're doing that as a solo player, then you let go of everything except for just the one note, one voice. Back to this chord again. It's pretty easy, I think, for most of us to voice the top. It's easy to voice the bottom too, but these inner fingers, the C, E, G, and C, the E and the G, that's kind of hard. Well, if I want to learn to voice the G, let go of everything except for the G. And, if it's a sequence of chords, that's what I'm doing. I'm letting go of everything except for my third finger, which is playing those. Why does that work? I don't know. But I can tell you it does. The thing with voicing and playing something louder on the piano, a lot of people think that you play louder on the piano by putting more weight into it. And that's not actually the case. I weigh 170 pounds, but I can sit on this piano, and it doesn't really make a sound, right, if I sit soft. It really has to do with velocity, with how fast you put the key down that makes the sound a little bit louder. And I guess there's a little bit of weight in there as well, but here's the trick with that exercise. I didn't finish it up. You practice like that, letting go of all the notes except for the one you want to voice. And what you're doing is training your fingers to play the non-voiced notes very light and quick and quiet. And then you're training your whatever finger you want to voice to put a little bit more velocity, a little bit more weight into that because you're holding it down. You're letting everything else go very quickly. And so after you practice like that for a while, then you go back and play it normally, right? You can't end there. You can't let go of notes. You have to hold them down. But you go back and play it normally, but you try to replicate that same feeling of lightness in all the other fingers and heaviness in whatever finger you're wanting to voice. It'd be cool, for you guys to take whatever piece you're accompanying and take 4 measures of it where there's SATB writing and sit and practice that first with the bass, then with the tenor, then with the alto, then with the soprano, and then see if you can play all 4 parts, but bring out each one of those parts. Good exercise to do, and it just makes your control over the keyboard a little bit better. How many of you? I'm going to skip over G because we've talked enough about the director's boss. How many of you guys play by ear very well? Do you play by ear well? I do to a point. I don't have perfect pitch. Most hymns I'm able to figure out fairly quickly. And I played a lot of jazz when I was growing up and in through school. And so I think a lot of the jazz training kind of helped my ears a little bit. I don't play it by ear as well as some folks do, but I play by ear better than others. When I was growing up, the minister of music at our church told me the best advice for learning to play by ear that also helps you transposing, and that is he told me to take one hymn out of the hymn book, just one hymn a week. It can be any hymn you want, and master it in all 12 keys. So take What a Friend We Have in Jesus or Amazing Grace, and take it through all 12 keys. Now, I don't mean just kind of play it in all 12 keys. I mean take the 4 parts and transpose it exactly in all 12 keys. Okay? Well, that does a couple of things for you. The first thing that it does is develop your ability to transpose, right? Because, I mean, you know, everyone sits and says, well, I can't transpose. I just envy people that can transpose. I can't do that. Well, how much do you practice it? You know? And if you practice every day, you know, or every day you're carrying one hymn through all 12 keys, then you're getting your transposition right away. Okay? Now, most directors, you're not ever going to hopefully be asked to play an entire accompaniment in a different key. But a lot of times, if you're working an a cappella piece, the director might decide, you know, I like it a half step up. And so we're going to rehearse it a half step up. So you've got to be able to play everything a half step up. Well, that helps that. The other thing that does is help the playing by ear. It really does help that. At first, when you start taking a hymn and you move it up a half step, at least for me, it was very intellectual. It wasn't a whole lot of ear, it was more intellect. I was playing this note, and now that I'm up a half step, so that means this note has to now be here. But after you work it through, by the time you get to about your 3rd or 4th key, you're still working your intellect, but it's amazing how your ear really does start to kick in, and your fingers kick in, and all of a sudden you might be relying on your ear a little bit more than you realize. Great way to kind of improve that. So I would recommend taking a hymn a week and take it through all 12 keys. And then at the very least, if you're playing To God Be the Glory one day for a soloist and she turns around and says, that's too high for me, you know, you're a little bit better at, you know, lowering it. So there's also some maybe payoff there with your accompanying that you do for folks, your solo accompanying. So, ability to play open score, right? We talked about that a little bit. You had that question on that. Open score is tough, and I'll tell you the things that you can do that I've found. If you have the music ahead of time, and if you're adept enough at theory, and not all of us are like, I don't know where your theory levels are, but if you have the ability to recognize chords, going home and taking that open score and saying, okay, there's 4 parts that are going crazy right here, but really this is all just a C chord. And then it goes to an F chord here, and then it goes to a G chord. That is so helpful, right? Because then when you get into, you know, the rehearsal, you might not be able to play everything, but if you know it's primarily a C chord that's going on, you can at least play that. And then you can play an F chord and then a G chord, and you can establish the tonality. So, you know, this goes back to your music school days if you went into any of these theory classes. But if you can do what we call a harmonic analysis on your open score, that's going to help. Okay, because then you at least know you can play the chords, and everyone can kind of get their pitches from that. I practice with the bass and every combination. At least with most of the directors that I've worked with, they at least want to hear the bass. I mean, you keep as much going as you possibly can, but if you have to drop out something, at least keep the bass there. Because that, you know, they could be in some kind of inversion. What I mean by that is the root of the chord might not be what the basses are singing. But for the most part, you establish tonality with the bass. Larry Captain, who was a director at the University of Colorado that I worked with, he would always tell me in open score, at least keep the soprano and bass going. You know, and if you can do that, then you're establishing the melody, you're establishing the harmony. Another trick that I look for when I'm preparing open score, if it's really difficult, I will look to hear where the important lines are. Where are the important lines? The ones that are moving. You know, and so if you're playing, you know, 4-part harmony open score, and the alto is kind of stagnant, and the soprano is moving, and the bass is stagnant, but you've got tenor and soprano that are moving, that's probably the parts that I highlight with a yellow marker. You know, and that's what I'm going to play when I get to those sections. Very few of us can sit and play open score incredibly well. I mean, a professional accompanist can, who spends his life doing that. But even those guys aren't sight reading it. You know, it's probably just pieces they've played a gazillion times, and they know it just like they would a repertoire piece. You know, but harmonic analysis, keep the bass and soprano going at all times, and then highlight what looks like to be the important parts. We've talked a little bit already about the knowledge of the vocal instrument. What about time? Let's talk about time. Let's see. Let me pull this guy out right here. I have, damn. I came in here a little bit late, so I should have this thing already out, and I don't. I'm looking for my metronome, and it's in here. I have my metronome with me because I'm actually going to be recording a CD a little bit later in the month. I've got a piano book coming out, so you guys be sure to look for it in the fall. I'm making a mess here is what I'm doing. I came in here kind of late. I tell you what, I won't even do it with this. I'll just demonstrate it with scales. Yeah, I've got a book of piano offertories that's coming out. Actually, it's going to be in the spring that will be marketed, but it will be in print in the fall, and it's arrangements of all sorts of old Sacred Heart hymns. And so you guys, be on the lookout for that. One of the things I'll have people do to develop their time, and I'm a teacher, so I work this a lot with students. I have what I call metronome games. But these are games that for a lot of folks aren't very fun, but I think they're fun. And I'm going to demonstrate it right now with just scales, but I hope you can make the application to whatever piece you're accompanying. Okay? How do we work with the metronome? Well, what we do is we place the metronome on the downbeat, and it clicks off every beat. That's how we do it, right? So, if I, well, here, I'll tell you what, I'll do this. I'll play a little bit of it. If I'm going to work a piano piece with this, I'm going to place it on beat 1, and here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Well, is that the only thing we can do with the metronome? That's the most obvious thing. But when you're working your choral pieces and they have to require a good steady time, let's have some fun with the metronome. Right now, it's on the downbeats. Could you play that with the metronome on the offbeats? So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Into it. I didn't catch that the first time through, but I bet I rushed when I had it on the downbeat. But when I moved that metronome to the offbeat, then all of a sudden that click is highlighting a part of the beat that I wasn't paying that much attention to before. So there was some rushing going on that I've got to fix. If I don't want that to rush. Right? So one simple thing you could do is, instead of having it clicking every beat, move it to the offbeats. What about this? The tempo right now is 76. I'm living proof that musicians are not always good at math. What's half of 76? 40, no. 38. Yeah. I don't go down to 38. I'm going to move it at 40. We're going to pretend like I was clicking at 80 and now I've cut it in half. It was 40. So now then what I'm going to do is play this, but let this be beats 1 and 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. What about when this be 2 and 4? I tried 1 and 3. What about 1, 2, 3, 4, 1? Sorry. Right? If you practice any kind of rhythmic thing with a metronome like that, it'll drive you crazy at first. But you'll see your time improve. And in your pieces where you have to establish a good time, it'll pay off. I'm not sure where I came up with that, actually. I practiced my classical music. I don't really practice classical anymore, but when I was doing all my Chopin etudes, I never had a metronome on the downbeat. I think a lot of it came from my jazz practice. I don't know if we have any jazz fans in here, but let's get the metronome tempo up to it. This is 100. Well, if I were going to practice jazz against this, there's no way I would have that on the downbeat. right? And it would be on the upbeats because that's what a snare drummer would do, right? So I would practice something like a... Something like that. Does that make sense? You see what I'm doing? I have it on beats 2 and 4, right, instead of on the downbeat. And so somewhere along the way, I kind of thought, well, shoot, it works so well for jazz, I think I'll play it with my written music and move it there. And when I did that, I started to really see my time start to improve just exponentially. So practice your octavos and everything that has to, be rhythmic. Do it with the metronome and have fun with the metronome games. People hate the metronome, but they don't have a lot of fun with it. If you have a lot of fun with it, it can be very helpful. The final thing is listen. Listen. You have to listen to everything as an accompanist. And that goes back to what I just said earlier, or an hour ago when we started. Because if you get the latest Heather Swords and anthem, and she's written it in this kind of a contemporary style, or if you get the latest Marquez thing, or the latest Lloyd Larson thing, or Larry Shackley, and he's done the Celtic thing, well, you've got to kind of know that style to know how to replicate it at the piano. You can't play Celtic the way you do R&B. I don't know if we have R&B in any of our churches, at least not the one I've been in. But you understand that there is a difference there, okay? So you have to listen to pieces that are really outside of your comfort zone, okay? On my iPod, there's everything from Johnny Cash to Merle Haggard to Mahler. Mahler's my favorite composer. To Dan Forrest, who I also love. To Paquito de Rivera, Latin jazz, and all sorts of jazz artists. To show tunes. I'm a big Broadway fanatic. Everything is there. And it really helps out when you're called upon to play a different styles because you've got some idea of that style. I think accompanists and pianists like the style that they like. And that's what they listen to and what they play, and you have to be a little bit more open-minded in that. Guys, that's all I have. I hope some of it has been helpful. I'm sure not all of it has, but maybe if you can take one or two things away, then that's worth the price of admission. You have any questions? Anything that I can answer for you?
Likewise, accompanying a good choral director can help your playing so much.
Yeah.
And if you work with someone who's really good at interpreting the music, then when you're playing something on your own at home, you're almost imagining how they're interpreting it.
That's right.
And then if you work with someone that just does this, you tend to play like that.
Yeah, right. That's right. That's exactly right. Well, the other sessions that I'll do, and I'd love for you guys to come, I'll do a piano arranging session sometime this week. And I think what I'm going to do with that, I'm going to pass out a copy. In fact, that opening couple of bars, there's an opening of an arrangement I wrote for There Is a Fountain. And with the handout, I've got a copy of that. And we're going to just kind of go through it and analyze it and see all the kind of arranging tricks. So if you're interested in arranging, come back for that. And then we'll also do a lead sheet thing later on. Pianists are kind of becoming more and more educated where we're okay with lead sheets more so than maybe we were 10 years ago. But if, looking at a blank fake book or a lead sheet still kind of scares you a little bit, I've got maybe some ways we could talk through that. And then along with what you're talking about, there's a musical extrovert thing that I'm going to do.
Was that I don't remember seeing that.
Yeah, it's in there somewhere. It is in there somewhere.
So you dig through there.
And what that really is just ways that I've kind of found to help people make the piano sing a little bit more and be more musical. And I've developed it because it's something I've struggled with. I'm a big perfectionist. I hate wrong notes. And when I was going through school, a lot of times I found myself more concerned about playing all the notes right than really making some kind of music with it. And so it's some kind of things that help with our solo playing. So anyway, thanks guys so much. I appreciate it.